Yeah, we want that. And so this passage actually starts in a totally different tone. It starts with about as much gloom and despair and weight as you can manage to stack onto two poor individuals. Before we go there, let's just have a look at perhaps one or two words that might help steer us through this, and then we're going to tell a story from the 1940s. Hope smashed, a shift in beliefs, hope renewed, a new reality. Perhaps, I wonder, a possibility, that Luke brings this story because he sees a pattern in the people of the new church. He sees a pattern that actually people struggle to grasp the exciting, radical, impossible story of Jesus because they're holding on to something so tightly. And until they let that go, it's hard to shift in beliefs. And without that shift, it's hard to have your hope renewed. And without your hope renewed, it's hard to live that new reality. And so this passage, I think, reminds us there's some difficult steps in understanding, believing, grasping a story that is just so impossible. I'm clicker free, I think, so that's perfect. Thank you. So we're going to take a wee dander into Montana, 1949, 5th of August, mid-afternoon. 15 young men leap out of a plane. Smoke jumpers was their title. Their job to fight the fires. 15 young men leap out of the plane and landing near the top of the hill. They make their way down towards the river. You can see it down there. And into an increasingly smoky zone. A small fire on the far side of the valley burning, and their hope was to put it out. As they approach, the wind veers. It swings round and runs up the valley, up the river, and strengthens. And their flames turn towards them. And in the wind, they jump across the valley and settle just down the hill. At 5:45, they turn round. Not yet realizing the full danger, but realizing that the situation has changed and they should leave rather than approach. 10 minutes later, 8 minutes later, charging up this hillside that you can see, growing fear, they drop their tools. 2 minutes later, as Wagner Dodge steps out of the scrub and the trees into grass savanna, he realizes they're not going to make it over the ridge to safety. It's impossible. The flames are capping out on the top of the trees. They're jumping from treetop to treetop, and in front of them is grass. The wind has reached 20 miles an hour, and gusts of 40 buffeting them. The flames are chasing them faster than they can run. At that moment, Wagner Dodge does the unthinkable. Taking a match from his pocket, he lights a fire. I'm going to read you his words. I glanced over my shoulder and saw it coming. A wall of orange, black smoke rolling above it, sparks whipping ahead of the wind. It moved with a speed no man could outrun. The truth settled on me heavy and cold. The ridge was too far. I stopped. The others kept going, driven by fear and instinct, scrambling upwards through the brittle grass. I pulled a match from my pocket and struck it against my leg. The flame caught the grass at my feet. I bent low, fanning it outwards with my hat, watching as it burned a circle into the slope. Smoke curled, and the flames died away quickly, leaving behind it a growing patch of black earth. "This way," I shouted, "into the black, lie down with me." No one came. Panic had already taken hold. To them, it looked like madness, setting fire to the grass while another fire bore down on us. I wanted to grab them, to drag them into the circle with me, but they were gone before I could take a step. Their figures blurred in the smoke, scattering towards the ridge that would never save them. I stood alone in the blackened patch, ash swirling at my boots, the roar behind me closing fast. I dropped to the ground in the ashes, my bandana pulled tight across my face. The heat pressed down like a weight. The roar of the fire grew loud until it was all I could hear. The flames leapt over the burning patch, rushing past in a sheet of orange. Smoke billowed, sparks rained, and then it was gone. The fire had searched for fuel and found none where I lay. I lifted my head. The slope around me was blackened, the air thick and choking. My patch of ground still smoldered, but I was alive. I stood slowly, legs shaking, and looked for the others. Silence hung heavy over the ridge. They were gone. It took 15 minutes for the fire to pass over him. During that time, a description of his body being lifted by the tumult of the air. 3 times he was lifted off the ground and thrown back down again, but wasn't burnt. His words again. It had been instinct. I had never been taught to do it. No handbook had told me that flame could fight flame. In that desperate moment, clarity had come. If the fire needed fuel, I would take it away. It saved me. Sadly, 13 men lost their lives that day. But firefighting changed its strategy and its techniques in response to that moment of clarity. It's a tall step, but I'd like us to take a step onto the road to Emmaus with Cleopas and his friend. May have been his wife, may have been another man, who knows. Cleopas and his friends. It was Sunday. Friday, Good Friday, Bad Friday, had ended tragically at sunset. Everything stops at sunset. The Sabbath, the Passover. The grief didn't stop. The despair, that sense of being lost. The fear, the Roman occupation. We hid. And on Sunday morning, strange news from the tomb, and we walked. If we listened to Cleopas, maybe those would have been his words. And so this heavy, heavy weight, this burden they carried, they walked on the road, and a man came up to them. If we could move on the slide, thank you. A man came up to them. You can hear in this verse, and you can hear in the verse before. These are the words that Cleopas uses. It describes Jesus. Have you not heard about Jesus? He was crucified. He was a prophet, powerful in word and deed before God. They sound great words, don't they? Until you realize they're a declaration of desperation. What do you mean? When Jesus went to the cross, he was the Messiah. He was Cleopas's Messiah. Messiahs don't die. So when Cleopas downgrades Jesus to a prophet, it's desperation. Jesus was just a prophet, powerful in word and deed. Hear the desperation. My Messiah is no more. He never was. He never was. And that is hope smashed. There's no way to make that worse. And moving on. They met a man. They were explaining this to the man. And the man knew that this was the moment. In that desperation, in that loss of the Messiah, of the hope of being set free from invading Romans, of having their country again, of being united. In that loss of that, Jesus knew there was the opportunity to speak into that. And what he spoke was the truth. What he spoke was the same truth he'd been speaking for 3 years. But when you hold a truth so tight, we don't always hear. With empty heart, hands, mind, Cleopas began to hear what Jesus said. And starting with the scriptures, starting with Moses and the prophets, Jesus explained. There was a transformation as they listened, an incredible transformation. It's hard to hold something new, though. It takes time. Until they saw Jesus alive. They suddenly, as Jesus broke bread, they suddenly recognized him, and that transformation was complete. Jesus had been downgraded from Messiah to prophet. In this moment, Jesus was alive, but Messiah had been upgraded from the warrior king, listen carefully, to the suffering servant, Prince of Peace. We all know that doom feeling when we're rushing into a meeting on the computer and you open up Zoom and it says, you need to update. We're like, it takes time. It takes time, and we have to wait. When Cleopas and his friend were on the road, those 7 miles, they heard and heard and heard and heard, and as Jesus broke the bread, the little sign in the corner of the screen said, "Update complete. Your warrior king Messiah has been upgraded to suffering servant king, Prince of Peace." Inside out, upside down, topsy-turvy, impossible and true at once. And moving on. They reflected back and they were going, oh, yeah. We knew that. We could sense that. We could feel that in those words. Yes. Yes. Yes, we could. We could. Our hearts were warmed. It was amazing. You know, our warrior king, when you actually think about it, our warrior king can't win against violence and evil. We don't fight hatred with hatred. We don't fight with force against force. All we'll do is make it worse. We see that in play today so much. We don't fight against violence and evil with violence and evil. And so they began to realize, and their hearts were warmed by the possibility, by the adventure, by the fact that over the 3 years Jesus had spoke of his kingdom, he'd lived his kingdom, he'd talked those truths, he'd taken those truths on the cross, and he was alive. Our suffering servant king, the Messiah. It's great. Moving on. You know this feeling. You know this feeling that Cleopas had. That feeling of being on the shadow line between the sun and the warmth and the cold of a shadow, and stepping between them. You know of the heart in there, that wrestling sense between warmth and coldness, between hope and despair, between light and dark. We know that sense. That's what Cleopas and friend were experiencing, the warmth, and their previous thoughts cold, somehow impersonal, exciting because that's all we hold, desperately, and yet just cold and inanimate compared with the warmth and vitality of Jesus' truth. Luke's inspired by this. He's really inspired by this. He knows in these verses, can't remember how many, 22 verses, 23 verses, he is saying there's a pattern. This is not one-off. That's why we get 40% of his final chapter. Do you know he starts this story right at the beginning? You know it. And Mary laid Jesus in the manger because there was no room. No room. Their beliefs did not have the space for a king born of poor people. There was no room. Katie reminded us of a Jesus that rode into Jerusalem on Donkey Sunday, Palm Sunday. People missed the donkey. They saw the warrior king. Finally, we will be restored. They missed the donkey, symbol of peace. Jesus rode into Jerusalem on a donkey, and they missed it. Here's two more people after this who still needed to let go of truths. Peter, brought up, grown in Judaism. He was a Jew, heart and heart. He knew the stories. He held the truths. And yet, some of those truths needed to be changed. Then a voice told him, "Get up, Peter, kill and eat." "Surely not, Lord," Peter replied. "I have never eaten anything impure or unclean." Peter literally had to kill his beliefs. And Paul, so well doctrined, so determined to hold the law and the truths and the judgment of God, so determined that he went on rampage to eliminate the new Christians. Saul got up from the ground at his conversion, and when he opened his eyes, he could see nothing. So they led him by the hand into Damascus for 3 days. 3 days. Jesus had 3 days in the tomb. For 3 days, he was blind and did not eat or drink anything. Paul literally had to unsee his belief. Unsee his belief that his job was to eliminate the Christians. They're powerful words, aren't they? The people walking in darkness have seen a great light, and those living in the land of the deep darkness, a light has dawned. We so want that. We so want that. Luke says you can have that, but you may have to let go of some of the things that you hold dear. Challenging beliefs has a danger. Faith is about holding on to truths that we don't yet know or experience. And yet we're also being asked to let go of them. Thank God, thank Jesus that he does that reviewing process with us. Otherwise, we'd be in the territory of total danger. Jesus will help us challenge and shape our beliefs. He will do that for us. He did that for Cleopas. He did that for Peter. He did that for Paul. He'll do that in our hearts. Just to summarize, Wagner had to let go of the belief that his job was to defeat the fire or evade the fire before he realized that he could disarm it. He had to let go of one thing before he tumbled to this truth: you can disarm the fire. Cleopas needed to smash his belief that the Messiah was going to be a warrior king before he could meet the suffering servant Messiah. Peter had to let go of a lifetime conditioning. God's creation was somehow split into pure and impure before he could realize that God loved all his creation, every person, everything. Paul had to let go of the need to be God's standard bearer and judge before he could realize we all fall short of God's standards and are saved by grace. And you hear those words in his writing again and again and again. That lesson he learnt in those 3 days of darkness changed his belief. Our beliefs and prejudices take many forms, but Jesus summarized with these words: love the Lord your God with all your heart, your mind, your soul, and love your neighbor and enemies as yourself.